To my left, we have Hanna, who's the Chief Marketing Officer of Richline. And then we have Mom Pauline again. And we have Eric Braunwart, who's the founder and owner and chief poobah of Columbia Generals. And a major innovator in this area for decades. So what we're going to be talking about is, again, I'm going back to something Brad said first thing this morning when he said you solve a problem and then lots of new problems pop up. It doesn't mean you didn't solve a problem. It doesn't mean that what is being done isn't good. But it does mean that there are often knock-on effects that are either unanticipated or sometimes people just don't want to think about or deal with. And we want to think about them and deal with them. So we want to talk about this topic of carbon zero in all its complexity. And I mean, carbon zero itself is an easy concept to understand, but there's something happening in the public corporate space that's important, and it's also going to affect, in ways positive and negative and neutral, the ASM space. So what I'd like to do is just start with Mark explaining to the audience what the SEC is about to require and what that means for corporate reporting, but also for corporate resources. Where does your attention and now money have to go as it relates to sustainability?
Well, really talking about climate change and all the effects, and I'm sure you guys all read everything I read, and recently the UN said it's going to get much worse than originally predicted. And I'm a little worried because they originally predicted the end of the world because of it, so. But, okay, net zero, let's define net zero. The total cumulative energy still in the room. Wake up! To your point, Andre, that from a corporate point of view, and therefore from a trickle-down point of view, pretty much to everyone, from the UN to now to the SEC, climate has become a gigantically important industry concern, not just our industry, all industries. And I think that it may be a little less discussed in our industry. That correctly, human rights is number one, and conflict has been up there, but you're going to find that because of what's really happening in the world, and because of a lot of the governmental regulations and a lot of the efforts addressing it, I believe COP, Conference of the Parties 27, starts Sunday, which is the second one. That entire worldwide conference is based upon looking at the impacts of climate change and environmental deterioration in our world, which we're part of.
Well, and it's a human rights problem. We have to remember that the people who are most causing the carbon in the atmosphere are wealthy nations, and the countries that are going to most suffer and really suffer from climate change are the countries that aren't consuming all of this energy. So there's an inequity to climate change, and it's going to present, and is already presenting, significant human rights and health and well-being issues. So,
yeah, I really would suggest that you look at a couple of websites that netzero.org is worth looking at. But I think that the COP website is definitely worth looking at. And we all need to be cognizant now of, even at the smallest level, we're either part of the problem or we're part of the solution, and we have to decide which. So there's going to be major impacts, and just to take it from the corporate side, I mentioned the SEC. Well, alongside financial reporting for major corporations, and I know one called Berkshire Hathaway, that alongside the 10Ks and alongside the balance sheets is going to come climate mitigation and climate risk disclosure for each corporation. If you wanted something to pique the interest at an executive level, tell them they have to report it publicly. And I think that, I have to speak for our corporation, that it's kicked off a very major effort from what was a conversation to what now is an all-out inventory of emissions, ESG, gases, carbon dioxide, methane, all the different types of things that are bad for the environment. And, the good things that we talk about, and we have some of those too, we have 180,000 square foot solar array in Rio Grande in New Mexico. We're very much net negative, not even net zero with what we're producing there. But the other areas are that all the efforts, and we have a lot of talk about the Amazon today, talk about worrisome, and all that deforestation is the wrong direction. And the Amazon is really one of the climate critical areas of the world right now, and the mining certainly isn't helping it. So, the SEC is going to step up everyone's game. That's going to translate down to major retailers. That's going to translate down to everybody.
And that means you're throwing people at it. How many people have you got just focusing on collecting this data? How many people in your organization are focused just on collecting this data?
9. Yeah, we have 16 locations worldwide. I don't want to get too much into Richline, but and 5 divisions. But we have now put together a team of 9. Some of that's overlapped with the Richline Responsible Program, which has dealt with everything else from concrete minerals on down. But this is absolutely being addressed. You have to deal with it from a governance and management point of view. You have to deal with it as we are now, from where are we, our inventory point of view, that we have been doing the work throughout every location to try to get our inventory. And I don't want to get too much detail, but Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 is something you're going to hear a lot about. Scope 1 is the energy that we ourselves produce and generate. Scope 2 is that we utilize, like FedEx and the local utilities. And Scope 3 is your supply chain. And supply chain is going to be a case of kind of like Dodd-Frank, that this is our family values. And we need to know that your family values match my family values. So I'm going to need to know an awful lot of things about you and what you're doing, at least in terms of my impact by buying products from your facility and what energy and what negatives are going in the production of those products. So it becomes, we're very material oriented, this business between gold and diamonds and stuff, but materials come first. What's really behind the production of those materials, and is it positive, is it negative, and what do we do about it?
So the Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 thing, the reason I asked about how many employees you just have working on this is that public corporate attention right now is being diverted to this in the form of lots of labor cost and attention and resources. And it's cool that corporations need to pay attention to this. This is very important. It also affects corporate ability to contribute to initiatives like, these other teams have been talking about. It's not bad or good, it just is. So we need to be talking about what the effects are. So in Scope 1 and Scope 2, your own usage and your own direct suppliers' usage, you have to start reporting on that in January, right?
Yes, we did. We actually have hired NAVEX. They're quite a well-known professional organization when it comes to ESG type of things. We're utilizing their platform, we're utilizing their queries, and we produced a dashboard of where we are, and we're continuing to add to that. Again, across the world, we have over 4,000 employees, and I said 16 locations. So it's quite an impactful study, but we don't know where to go until we know where we are. And we're learning. We are really, really learning. We are definitely getting surprises.
Well, and a lot of corporations are kind of making it up as they go as a result. So then the next thing that happens is it affects someone like Columbia Gem House, because they're starting to chase their supply chain back. So Eric, talk about how this impacts you and companies like yours.
I guess that's what I got in this panel. Mark, on Monday, when we did a sort of a run-through on this, had a really good PowerPoint, and I wish he had shown it tonight. because it would show you how detailed, how incredibly involved this is.
It's going up on the virtual site, so you all have access to it.
Good. And that's for publicly traded companies. But we're a private company, so technically we don't have to do that. But we sell to publicly traded companies, so we are in their scope 2 thing. And just a very brief thing, with one of our operations in China, our partner is a medical doctor. His son runs a labor NGO. His daughter is a surgeon. And we just finished 2. One was the first stage of the carbon. That's easy. They just ask what you know and what you do. You don't have to do anything yet. But we just finished stage 2 on the labor and safety. And boy, I'll tell you, we're pretty good. We're pretty smart at the way the West runs and does things. But when I have to go to my suppliers that don't even have electricity, forget using a computer, and get that information from them, I'm afraid of 2 things. One is that we end up marginalizing those ASM people who are already marginalized because they cannot meet these standards. They don't even understand what the hell we're asking for. And number 2, that it gets so onerous on them that they just decide we're going to sell to those 2 big giant countries that don't give, that don't care, that don't care about this sort of thing. They won't ask those questions. And thus that means that this country no longer has access to a lot of those stones. So you guys may know my company, and we've supported these sort of things for a long time. But we also, I heard earlier on one of the, I think it was the Amazon Watch presentation, when they said, you know, what's the consequences of what we do here? And I had this little doll on my desk, or I used to, and you'd squeeze it and its eyeballs would pop out, or its ears would pop out, or whatever. So when you squeeze our supply chain, something else happens. And we did just get notified yesterday that we passed the 2nd level, finally. Took us 3 months. Because just to give you guys some idea of what that entails, they may say, okay, I won't do the one that really annoys me. Okay, your fire extinguishers were not mounted to the wall. And then you go, okay, we mounted them to the wall, so you can come back and look at them. That's not good enough. You have to, in writing, do a report on the root cause of why they were not mounted on the wall. You have to ask root cause questions that then bring you up to the solution. Then you do the solution. Then you have to write, okay, how is it going to be monitored? How often is it going to be monitored? Who's going to be in charge and who's going to monitor it? And you have to, this is a big report for the worst one, which I will mention. We had a light bulb burned out in an exit sign. We had to write that whole report when it was just a crappy GE light bulb. So we're frustrated. We can make those levels. We can do it and we support it. But I'm really asking the industry for some understanding on how we go to places where we work, where, gosh, I'm not kidding, they don't have electricity. They've got almost nothing, and I'm going to ask them, please talk to me about your carbon footprint. We have to have some way not to, and Mark used the word, which I actually really like, not to put an embargo on dealing with small companies around the world, because particularly in some of the producing countries, they are particularly in color, they are 85% of the production. So what do we do if we, in effect, through what we want to see happen, to do good? I understand that and I support that. But that the negative effect is it cuts 85% of the supply out of our market. So I'm very concerned about that.
Well, and one of the things we discussed is that Scope 3 is not going to start being enforced yet. And Scope 3 is what really pushes all the way down through the supply chain. And there is still time for some input on this process. Yes?
Yeah, yes. And also, I mentioned COP27 before. It's coming up next week. World Gold is making a major presentation at that event on the impact of gold. So if you do pick this, I think it's cop27.org actually. And their presentation is going to talk about their learnings and their research with larger mining operations and the potential for committing to renewable energy. But it's also dealing a little bit with the artisanal area because it was asked to. And the data there is obviously very sparse. And it's more about land usage than it is about some of the carbon measurements that we're able to do in other ways. So I would pay attention to that. This is something very important, and it's going to be growingly important to our industry. LBMA, the other all the way upstream person, has something called good delivery. It got referred to a couple times. Brad referred to it earlier. They're considering environmental impacts in their good delivery standards. Right? And if they can include conflict, they can include environment. So these are really important things to pay attention to that will have an effect on us no matter how large or how small we are.
Well, and it's getting bigger and bigger because we're finally starting to do some of this here in the US, but it's also very similar programs across all of Europe. So we're going to see more and more regulation around the environment, not less. And maybe there are some ways to create either some exceptions or like a minimum standard for ASMs. These are things that can be looked at. But it's also possible to start thinking now about what do we need to do for ASMs so that they can be compliant in the future, so that it is easier for them to respond to these kinds of queries. And I know, Pauline, you've been looking at some of the things that ASMs don't have right now that it would be beneficial to get them so they could be participating, like at different types of equipment.
Yes, thank you very much because I know that sometimes someone's poison could be someone's fault. You know, it might seem to be indeed a challenge, but then you never know that maybe it could also be an opportunity. Because all I know is that a challenge will always create an opportunity. Yes, ASM really has a challenge, and then also when we talk about carbon emissions, I can assure you that the ASM contribute very little. I would say maybe ungraded 0%, 0 point something, because most of our operations are actually manual, with the shovel, with a pick and a chisel. But since this is what's required, that we have to get rid of the diesels and everything. I know in other countries it might be a problem, but then for Africa, in terms of renewable energy, we have the advantage of the sun, which is free of charge, because we don't have snow in Africa. Your winter is actually our autumn in Africa. So even if this ban comes along whereby we to be allowed to use diesel or whatever, just to reduce or to avoid the carbon fumes, will not be affected as the ASM. See, because the solar is there, but then we will need help from the big guys, because they're the ones that have actually contributed to the climate change. Not ourselves, we have not contributed. So I think this is an opportunity to be compensated by you guys. You need to compensate us in a way. But then how do you compensate us? Of course, by providing the facility, to help the equipment that can use solar. as I mentioned, that solar is there, and once that is done, it will mean that a lot of ASM who are not able to hire, equipment because they are not able to meet the cost of fuel will now be able to do that once the solar system is put in place. And eventually, even the cost of production will come down. See, because the cost of fuel is very high. So if that can be removed, and then instead now we use the solar energy which is renewable and which is available and at no cost in Africa. See? Because here you'll be saying, what about during snowing, then what happens? Then there will be no power. But in Africa there's nothing like that. It is 24/7. Solar and also free of charge. So what you are saying that once that is done, which we believe to us is actually an opportunity, it is an opportunity to increase our productivity with the low cost production cost, and also it is an opportunity not to increase labor. So in doing that, we are actually providing a better livelihood to the community, because our workers actually come from the community. And then there was also the issue of the ASM not being formalized. I think this can also help. When the ASM, the artisanal actually, the unlicensed, because in my country, when we talk of artisanal, there are two categories. There's the unlicensed artisanal, who does whatever he wants to do, does not pay tax. And then there is the licensed artisanal miner, who is compliant to paying tax. So it will mean now even the tax base is going to increase, because there will be more people that actually formalized, because they have seen that the cost of doing mining at that level will increase. And then the other thing also is that we'll see a situation where there will be graduation, the artisan will actually graduate to small scale, and then the small scale graduating to medium scale, then from medium scale now upscaling to large scale, to be like you.
So taking this as an opportunity and thinking about ASM.
Thank you, you really don't want to do that. I really did just want to add one more thing that, and this is, the whole conversation is indicative. We all need to be learn-it-alls and share-it-alls, because things are changing rapidly. And these are very important issues worldwide that we're going to need to deal with, because eventually it all comes down to us. Face it, we're a global industry. Like that, our materials start globally. So much, just look at the session before this, our stone cutting is global. That we need to pay attention as an industry, and I am quite sure that just as in many of the other industries right now, there will be industry-wide science-based targets which are paying attention to the most important quantitative measurements in our industry. Again, I keep referring things, but look at science-based targets, sbti.org. You may not be relevant for all of them to you. I'm sure it isn't relevant, but there's going to be a few that are very relevant to you and your business, and everyone's relative to the world, for all of us.
I didn't want to talk until that sunk in, because I think that's really important. So we've got great movement on having to start really measuring our carbon impact. And Mama Pauline brings a really cool message of let's use this as an opportunity in however we can, because it's coming. So let's find ways when we're working with ASM to make sure that they're prepared to respond to these things. But we've got this big gap, and how are we going to fill it? And it's this big gap between Mama Pauline's optimism, which is totally appropriate, and Eric's reality of possibly having to cut off suppliers because he cannot quantify what's happening with their carbon usage. And I don't know that any of us know that answer yet, but that's we don't get the answer until we ask the question, right? So how do we close that gap? And how fast?
And it is detailed. I know you can't see this. The PowerPoint Eric referred to is going to be available for everybody, and this is there. But this is just a single dashboard of our emissions from a single facility and all the details that we have to go to. You don't have to go to this level of detail, we do. But it's going to become a scorecard for everyone. And don't think that Gen Z and Gen Y don't care. They do care.
So what he has to report as a public company gets pushed to all the suppliers, who then push it to the rest of their suppliers. People have a tendency to push their own dashboard because they don't know how to develop a different dashboard that makes more sense for the next level. This is what happens. It happened with Dodd-Frank.
Well, in our case, we were, imposed a dashboard. I can't even find my way around it. I'm too old for that. But then I look at that, and the next stage is I'm supposed to go to my suppliers, and you're absolutely right. You produce 0.000% of the carbon, but we have to prove it in this dashboard format. And it's not going to be easy because I can't just make it up. I have to have documents that say, okay, we measured how much your one horse engine that pumps out your mine, produces for 12 people and 4 hectares. It might be a mine that we work with that we get $1,000 worth of material a year. There's no way we nor they could afford that. So I just don't know how, unless there's some sort of system. Again, I'm not worried that they wouldn't pass the carbon emissions thing, just like I wasn't worried that we were not going to pass the last one we just made it through. But it was not easy. And I'm concerned that our goal of making things better makes it much harder on certain people that can least afford it.
And just look at mercury and Toby's presentation. Mercury's part of this, that cyanide's part of this. A lot of the materials that we've not taken for granted, but we certainly utilize freely without the industry. Post-pandemic, they're all questionable, and they're all going to be questioned.
About the how. I don't think anybody really knows how the how here. And the how is not something that can come up just like that. It will take a bit of time. But then I think it's all about collaboration. It's all about, the ASM and then the large scale coming together, thinking together. Because there's a gap here. So we need to fill up that gap. How do we fill up that gap? It will mean that the ASM has to come down, and also the large scale has to come down and then meet there.
Absolutely.
That's good, because it is a win-win situation here.
And climate, climate isn't a standalone. I mean, this affects human rights, this affects job creation, this affects worldwide revenues. This affects everything.
And Monica's pointing out the outsized impact on artisanal miners. Let's go to Christina because she's got the mic.
Yeah, so I work for PACT, and we were intimately involved with the conflict minerals issue. We run the world's largest traceability system that's focused on ASM. And in 3
Nate, can you kill the podium mic? Because I think it's interfering with Christina's mic.
And so one thing we noticed when the SEC, when the Dodd-Frank law passed, which means that all U.S. publicly traded companies need to see if they have 10 tantalum tungsten or gold in their supply chain, and then report on an annual basis how they know they're not, how they know where it comes from, and how they know they're not funding armed groups. What happened was we have, I call it the conflict minerals industrial complex. So some people know about the military industrial complex in the US, where you have this huge lobby What happened in conflict minerals is you have this huge industry focused on reporting and itty-bitty for implementation. And we're 12 years out from Dodd-Frank. And things like child labor, things like environmental impact, things that are not within the really the minuscule lens in which Dodd-Frank was written, are not covered by any. There's very few companies that are funding that, and so I kind of know the answer if we look to history about what's going to happen here. You're going to have a risk response, a risk mitigation response, paper pushing exercise. Some companies will be, have meaningful responses, but others will just want to report and make it up or hide behind, like, we can't find that information. So I am worried. There are ways that you can actually win the sustainability argument in ASM. You can do something called insetting. So offsetting is when you do a sin, you purchase a little offset, you hide that little sin. Insetting is when you actually build in carbon sinks in your supply chain. So instead of just hiding that original sin, you actually you're making minerals restorative instead of exploitative, if that makes sense. So there are ways that you can do this, but you need to be able to reach miners. And so what are we going to do? We're going to leave people behind like we have been for decades?
And see,
That's my question.
we weren't all having this conversation when Dodd-Frank came about. There wasn't a group of us working at the smaller level having the conversations. And so this is truly a call to action at this point. Who can lead it? How do we lead it? Who do we go to? Because I agree, Pauline, it's not going to get solved in this room. But this is a conversation that there is a moment to have it because the third phase isn't being enforced yet. And this is our opportunity to create some definitions that protect ASM. But we can't just sit here and complain about it happening. Well, we can, but it doesn't do us any good. We have to act. So, let's see. Brian has the mic.
So Brian Cook, hi. Christina just brought up the subject I was going to speak about. So Eric brings up the concern about not marginalizing the ASM community, stone producers, and I think we all need to focus on that. And one of the ways that we can mitigate that and how we're going to address what can we do, since we have very, very small carbon footprint, I think planting trees is a way to mitigate that. And I think regenerative agriculture is a very legit way. And regenerative agriculture and reforestation can go hand in hand with small-scale mines of all types. And so if we make that part of our industry initiative to help artisanal communities by teaching and encouraging food production in a regenerative way, reforestation around mitigating mine reclamation or reinvigorating degraded land from over farming. These are things that can we possibly start doing that right away and use metrics as a way to begin measuring that as we're doing it.
Well, and convince somebody, like who do we go to and how do we package it and how do we propose it to say, this is how anyone that falls into this ASM sector is allowed to respond to the company pushing upstream, their need for documentation. See, that's the gap we need to fill because I think ASM communities are happy to do restorative agriculture and, reclamation. But it's how do we fill the gap with the reporting so that means something all the way upstream to Eric and then to Mark.
Well, we create models right away that are monitored, and the science and the research and the documentation is part of that cost. And once that model is demonstrated, then it's easily replicated.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I think that I'm gonna, the older I get, the closer I get to being a librarian, but this book's called Net Positive. This is written by the chairman of Unilever and Andrew Winston, which is one of the environmental experts in this world. This is really worth reading. Even if you just, I mean, if you look, you see my book, the pages flipped. I only, out of 280 pages, I probably only flipped over 240. But I would recommend, you know, at least delve into it, go to the glossary, see what things are relevant to you. This is great advice because it's business advice. And it's giving really concrete examples of what companies are doing to address it at a level. And Unilever is certainly one of the biggest worldwide. You remind me, Brian, because you talk about balancing agriculture and other industries. That's a very important tenet of this book. So.
I just want to respond to the gentleman there. You know, every time, you know, I've been an ASM operator for 33 years. And every time there's an issue of climate change, the issue of the damage, the ASM is always singled out. But then my question is, even in terms of hectareage, the area of operation, the artisanal is very small. Look at, I'm talking from the experience of giving a Zambian scenario. Zambian scenario, a large scale, is given an area of maybe 20,000 hectares. But as an artisanal is 5 hectares. So even if we can have 100 artisanal miners, it won't be 5,000 against 20,000 hectares. But then, an artisanal all the time, you know, is labeled as someone who has actually destroyed the environment. So I said that it's the best thing is the two should sit together. That strong collaboration is very, very important. How much damage has the artisanal contributed to the climate change? How much damage has been done by the LOSA, the large scale? I think then that way we'll find the answer. I mentioned that we need to be compensated because the damage is strong. You big guys. So you need to compensate the smaller one because we are equally affected now. So the issue of planting tree, yes, that is a good idea. But then what about the large scale? Who has damaged, a big area? Because the large scale, like in copper mining in my country, our government right now, they're saying that we should increase to about 3 billion tons per year. So then how much damage to the land will be done? It will be too much. So it means an increase in the hectareage, of those mines. So there will be more damage done by the large scale, even in terms of degradation of the land. We talk about forestation because when an excavator comes, it will uproot a big area. Even those people that are doing commercial farming, it's much less. And those, every time their land, it's always planted. But then with mining, the large scale mines, they destroy the land, they contribute to the climate change more than the ASM. So all we have to do now here is let us work together. How are we going to fill the gap? What is the solution? What innovations should be introduced, to find a solution to this climate change which is happening? What are we going to do now? And I know that even in this place we have with big brains, we can start from here. Let us find a solution. We are all here. See, we are the answers ourselves here. Thank you.
Gave me another segue for homework for everyone. The World Gold Council did just produce, this is called Lessons Learned on Managing the Interface Between Large-Scale, Artisanal, and Small-Scale Mining. I'm not saying to read the book. Go to the website, and right now this is all about climate, it's all about me. Look at the climate section in terms of the recommendations about shared renewables, how renewables from large-scale mining need to be used in communities, not just for the mine. There's a lot of really interesting ideas. I'm not saying there's any action yet, but there's a lot of very good prognosis in this document about what could happen.
We have time for one more question. Looks like it's Christina.
Sorry, everybody. I really appreciate Eric's feedback and Pauline's position. And Mark, I know you've always been open to the realities of the impacts of these big policy shifts and so on. I really have a bone to pick with the global gold mining industry. And it's coming up right now because we are seeing this positive opportunity, and I am not denying the positive opportunity for action that large-scale gold mines can really make a shift in the energy that they use and the way they impact communities. Global climate change and the fact that large-scale mining has polluted water bodies all over the planet, and we're seeing either increased desiccation or flooding, means that those pollutants from that early mining activity is now part of our everyday life too. Never do I hear a clear willingness to talk about the history and degradation, and we're gonna have to deal with it. So because you have the year of the LBMA, because you have the year of the World Gold Council, can we talk about the legacy impacts and their exacerbation of what we're going to be feeling?
I can answer part of that, Christina, but my main contact in this topic at World Gold is John Mulligan, and he's one speaking at COP27. This is very much on what he has to discuss, which is, putting things back the way they were, discussing the nature, a collaboration with nature that maybe didn't get discussed ever before. I think, if nothing else, the pandemic years have brought us all an awful lot closer to caring about the world we live in and the health of that world. So this is a very critical topic for World Gold because I mentioned the SEC. Remember, gold's also a very big investment, and they are going to be equally challenged to produce a pristine picture for gold based upon all these and certainly that type of reclamation is going to be part of it. Jen, or Virginia, other Jen. The Pure Earth projects to clean up tailings, throughout Indonesia and parts of the world. There are some good examples of what we need to be doing, and you're 1,000% right, Christina. It isn't just what are we doing now; it's what did we do, and what can we do about it. And I do think that's becoming a focal point, particularly because of what we've just hopefully come out of in this worldwide pandemic.
So we're out of time. I just want to kind of wrap this up. A really good thing is happening in terms of expecting corporations to manage their carbon output, which is potentially going to have really negative impact on a subset of people. And we have a very small window to try to figure out how to make a suggestion of how to make it work for ASMs. And this is what we all need to be thinking about. Somebody in here has the will and the capability to initiate an effort for us to figure out what to do. If we wait till July of next year, it's probably too late to start. So I don't mean to end on a downer because again, it's a really cool thing that's happening. The world is paying attention to the climate. It has to happen. But let's mitigate fast. And that's optimism. That's the power of acting instead of sitting around and bitching about the SEC, because we all know how far that gets us.
I have one more recommendation, which isn't particularly relevant to this, but it is. Go watch a movie called Don't Look Up. All right, that's it. I'm done. No more recommendations.
All right, you guys, this is the end of day one of the Chicago Responsible Jewelry Conference. How was it for you?